Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror anthology movie review video as part of my current March 2024 series. So we have reached the end. We're going to take a look at the 10th and final horror anthology movie for this particular series, not the end of the ones that I have in my collection, which are I probably still have 20 or 30 that I haven't watched or reviewed yet, so I'll definitely be having more of these kind of series in the future. But um, I did think I would end this series with a. I don't know how well known of a horror anthology it is, but it's kind of a highly acclaimed one, I guess is the best way to say it. It's a foreign film, and that is from 1964-65, Kwaidan, which um, I have the DVD here in the Criterion Collection case, which, funny enough, I just had this in my regular DVDs. I didn't realize this was Criterion. My guess is I probably received it and was in a hurry, and I just put it in alphabetical order with my DVDs. But I actually do separate Criterion Collection. Of course, I only had one. Now I have two with this one. The other being oh shoot. Oh, Carnival of Souls. I don't know why I always forget that. Carnival of Souls and now Kwaidan for um my Criterion collection. But anyway, yeah, this is a nice collection. It's got two discs here and a little booklet as well. Some special features on the back. Um but yeah, let's just go ahead and get into Kwaidan. I didn't know much about this other than it came from Japan. It was from the 60s, and it was a horror anthology that, from a critical standpoint, has always been highly praised. I don't know as far as how the people feel about it, the audiences, but from what I've seen and what I've heard, a lot of people like this movie. So let's just go ahead and get into it. So there's different ways to pronounce it. I don't know if Kwaidan is the correct pronunciation, but that's what I'm going to go with. So Kwaidan um, is a 1964 Japanese anthology horror film directed by Masake Kobayashi. It is based on stories from Lafcadio Hearn's collection of Japanese folk tales, mainly Kwaidan stories and studies of strange things from 1904, for which it is named. The film consists of four separate and unrelated stories. Kwaidan is an archaic uh, transliteration of the term Caden, meaning ghost story. So the word Kwaidan literally does mean ghost stories for what it's worth. So receiving critical acclaim, the film won special jury prize at the 1965 Cannes Film Festival and received an Academy Award nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. So yeah, that's sort of the setup and the gist of Kwaidan. So I'm just going to go through the four stories, give you some idea what they're about, then I'll get into my review. I'm not gonna give away the cast in this one because there's way too many, and let's face it, most of them are Japanese actors and actresses, and me trying to pronounce those names would be there'd be a whole video in and of itself. So the first story that we get is entitled "The Black Hair." So this is basically about a guy, a husband and a wife, and they're pretty much living in poverty, and the guy's pretty much sick of it. So he leaves his wife for another woman who's well to do. Basically, she's part of a family that's got a lot of money. So he basically marries into money, but of course finds out that money doesn't equal happiness, and the second wife that he takes to leave his first wife for is kind of selfish and not very nice, and so he regrets it and plans to return and ask for forgiveness from his first wife, and it kind of goes from there. I don't want to give too much away, but that's the first story. The second story, entitled "The Woman of the Snow," needless to say, there's snow in this story. But basically, you have these two guys that are out chopping wood. One is an older gentleman, and one's like an 18-year-old guy. Um, and they end up being in a blizzard, so they end up going into this like boathouse or this small cottage kind of house, like a storage shed or something. And befallen upon them is this I forget the name for it, but it's like a Japanese folk tale sort of ghost. Um, I don't know what you call it, like a ghost figure. and I forget the name of it, but basically she kills the older guy and then planned on killing the younger guy as well, but says because of his age and his good looks, basically she's going to spare him, but don't ever speak anything about what happened here again. And he returns home, and then he ends up meeting a young woman that he falls in love with, and they get married, have 3 kids, and the story kind of goes from there. Um, yeah, I'm not going to give more away than that. And then you got Hochi the Earless. Hoichi, no, Hochi the Earless is the third story. Also, the longest story of the anthology. This is obviously about, I shouldn't say obviously, it's about a young character, a gentleman that plays is it the wiba? The waiba? Some, some sort of instrument, Japanese instrument, and then he sings as well. He's blind. He's a young blind man. Um, and he sings about this war that we see at the beginning of the movie, this Japanese war that takes place, and a lot of people are killed. And then he's in his village or whatever one night, and sitting there out in the sort of the yard, and he's playing his instrument, and he hears a noise, and somebody calls his name and asks him to come and sing, basically perform for this high emperor kind of figure, and it kind of goes from there. So yeah, there's a lot to this one. And then our final story is in a cup of tea. It's called. This is the shortest one for sure, but basically it's about this. It's kind of a tale within a tale, if you will. It's basically about this author who's writing a story as his publisher's on the way over to get the story from him, basically. So he's finishing this tale, and it's basically about this guy, this samurai fighter, who gets they stop at it's like a tea shop, and he gets a cup of tea and ends up seeing a reflection of this other figure in his tea that he can't get out of his head, and he can't get out of his tea. Frankly, he ends up drinking it, as it turns out, which will be noteworthy for later in this story. But yeah, and then he's visited by he ends up running into this person that he saw the reflection of in his tea. Um, then he basically goes after him, and he also runs into three of his companions, if you will, that he ends up fighting with his samurai sword. And it kind of goes from there. Again, I don't want to give too much away in these stories, and there's a reason for that because I really want you guys to see this movie. I highly recommend it, which is how we'll kick off my review of this movie here. I absolutely love this movie. I had a feeling I would because it did have a lot of critical acclaim, um, but I was really taken aback even with my expectations going into it, which were kind of high, but not terribly high. And I really enjoyed it. So let's start with the pros or the things I really like. This will take a while. This movie's an experience more than it is just watching a movie. It's unlike most any other movie that I've ever seen before, or that I dare say most of you will ever see before. It's unforgettable and incredibly memorable. An incredible memor. It's sorry, an incredibly memorable set of folklore stories, basically. It is artistically stunning, visually amazing between the colors, the shapes on screen, the landscapes that are used throughout the overall movie, within all these stories. Just a mesmerizing watch. That's really the best way to describe this movie. It's just mesmerizing. All 4 of the stories presented here are all very well written, very well acted, produced, with underlying and interesting themes and narratives going on in each of them. I love the mood changing, unique visuals that they use within the sky and the background of these sets. AKA, there's a scene where you got like an eyeball in the sky that's popping up, watching over the certain scenes in the story. It's just so artistic and just so hard to turn away from. It's so addicting almost. It really helps set up the mood, and it creates a mood with those type of visuals and an atmosphere that is both weird and unsettling, but it works wonderfully for what this movie is. I love the setting that all these stories take place in, all the set pieces used throughout. Never disappoints, and it never feels like one story has more set pieces or more visual flair than any of the others. It's all pretty well balanced throughout all the stories and throughout the whole movie. Well, I wouldn't say this is an overly scary movie, especially in terms of modern horror anthologies. It definitely has some creepy imagery, some heartbreaking twists, and an unsettling mood and atmosphere that just works for this movie and the direction of it. The sound design, the musical cues, and the overall score that's used in this movie is awesome, and it really adds more to the movie's atmosphere and storytelling. I just absolutely loved it. If you've seen this movie, you kind of know what I mean with the sound effects because it doesn't. You don't always hear everything that happens, but you hear they purposefully give you sounds when you need to have sounds. Otherwise, you always got sort of a backdrop of musical cues and score going on. It's just awesome. Amazing cinematography and overall camera work that shows off the beauty in the landscape and the colors and all of its glory throughout this movie. Despite its length, I was never bored or disinterested at any point during this movie. Despite its runtime, as I said, it's just so visually stunning. It's so well directed, so well acted, and the stories are so interesting that you're never bored by it, even as time goes by. And a lot of time goes by with this movie. We'll get into that in a minute here. It's well balanced, though, in terms of its pacing and entertaining in terms of narrative storytelling. Um, if I had to rank the four stories, I really like all four stories. Let me say that first of all. Even my least favorite here is definitely one of my favorite overall horror anthology stories. All four of these stories are just awesome. But I would say the Woman of the Snow would be my favorite, followed by the Black Hair. Then Hoichi the Earless would be third, and finally In a Cup of Tea would be fourth. But like I said, I absolutely love them all. I think the reason I love Woman of the Snow, I think it's the one that's the creepiest in certain scenes when it needs to be. It's visually stunning. It's well acted. It's got a great twist. Um, just kind of everything about it. It's heartbreaking as well. It's got a very emotional tone to it. It just kind of has everything that you could want in a horror anthology story. The Black Hair is also a great tale. It has a lot of be careful what you wish for um, kind of themes going on here. And it also has just a batshit crazy last 5 minutes or so. Hoichi the Earless, which is the longest one, it definitely has the most character development. It has just some amazing visuals. Just probably the most stunning visuals and background of any of these stories. And then In a Cup of Tea is the shortest one, but still really interesting. And it kind of plays into the end of the movie as well. So yeah, those are my pros for Kwaidan. As far as cons go, some of these are more just a warning than they are flat out cons, in my opinion. But you do need to have a good amount of time to watch this movie because the version that I have here in the Criterion Collection is about 183 minutes. And when you translate that into hours, it's just over 3 hours. It is a 3 hour long movie. Where so each of these four stories, each of them about, well, it varies, but like the longest one's probably close to an hour on itself. I would say 50 minutes, and the shortest one's still about 20 minutes. But the average about 40 minutes, I would say, throughout the four for each of the stories. And so it is a long watch, which is not indicative of most horror anthologies that people are going to be used to, or even horror movies in general. So it might not be a top horror anthology that you're going to grab in terms of if you have a couple hours to kill on a Saturday night. If you only have a couple hours, it ain't going to work for you. Now, there is a shorter version of this movie. In fact, from what I read, there's like a when I say shorter, it's still 2.5 hours. But that was actually the version that was available in the United States for the longest time until Criterion Collection picked it up. And now you've got the version of Kwaidan is this version of Kwaidan is the original 3 hour cut, never before released in the United States. It says that on the back, and I believe this is the version that Masaki Kobayashi really wanted. So that's available now in this Criterion Collection. Again, this is the DVD Criterion Collection. There is a Blu-ray Criterion Collection as well, and they look very similar. The artwork is the same, so just wanted to point that out. But yes, it is a long watch, and that might scare some people off. But I'm telling you, don't be scared off by it. The movie makers do a magnificent job of keeping you in tune throughout. At least it did for me. I can't speak for everybody, but yeah, that is something to take note of, though. That if you don't have that much time to sit down and watch a anthology movie, it might not be the first one that you grab. It is long. Some of the effects haven't aged as well when you watch it today, particularly a black hair segment in our first story, the black hair. I'm not giving anything away there, but where the black hair starts to attack, it looks kind of silly and unconvincing, frankly. But again, this was made in 63, 64, 65, somewhere in there in Japan. So you kind of have to give them the benefit of the doubt with it. But that effect really doesn't hold up. I did feel like the fourth final story, The Cup of Tea, which was my least favorite, but I still like it. It's significantly shorter than the others, and there's a reason for that. I think of the four stories, it's the one that wasn't directly from um, the stories and studies of strange things. The folk tales by Lefkato Hearn. It was actually one I think that Kobayashi added. I think he did get the story from somewhere, but it wasn't where the other three stories were in terms of Hearn's writing. And you can kind of tell a little bit, but it's again, don't get me wrong, it's still a story worth checking out, as all of these are, frankly. But I just wanted to bring that up. It did feel a little more tacked on than the other three. This isn't. I guess my biggest warning to people out there: this isn't your modern day blood and gore, visceral horror movie, or even horror anthology movie with a lot of jump scares and on screen violence and blood and gore. So just know that going into it, this is much more of a ghost story, supernatural, folklore set of tales, basically from Japan, from over 60, about 60 years ago. They took tales from like 60 years before that. So now you're looking at 120 years that these folk tales were written. So it's not going to blow your socks off in terms of how scary it is, especially for modern day audiences now. But if you have an appreciation for the art, if you have an appreciation for ghost stories, folklore tales of a different continent, different country, from a foreign standpoint, then it's definitely worth checking out. It is in subtitles, of course, because this was made in Japan, so don't be lazy. Read your subtitles. It's really not that hard to follow. There is a narrator as well, and I'll kind of add this as a pro. It's not a. They don't have wraparound stories here, and most of the time that annoys me. But in the case of a foreign film with subtitles, I actually think they did the right thing by going with a narrator to kind of give the exposition that you need in and out of each of these stories. So I'm not gonna hold the fact that there's no wraparound story or connecting tissue in this horror anthology movie because it is very unique and different compared to the other horror anthology movies. But other than that, guys, I absolutely recommend this. I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. Came very close to giving it a 10 out of 10, but like I said, some of the effects don't age as well. And there were a few moments that I thought they could have cut back on the third story and maybe added some more to the fourth. So just very little nitpicks. Though I absolutely recommend Kwaidan from 1964-65, the Japanese horror anthology movie. 9 out of 10 for me as far as the rating goes. Go ahead and comment down below for any of you that have seen Kwaidan. What you think of it. Do you like it more than I do, less than I do? Tell me what stories of the four were your favorites and least favorites. I'd be interested in hearing. Please like this video, hit the little notification bell down below, and subscribe to my channel as well so you don't miss any of my great horror content. Not only my last video for this series, where I'll be ranking these 10 horror anthologies for this series that I reviewed, but also what I have, all the great horror content I have coming up for the rest of the year and into next year even. Don't want to miss it. So yeah, with that being said, watch this, get the Criterion collection. This is one of those movies I'm really glad to have in one of my higher end collections, my my company collections and Criterion collections. You know how there's some movies that you have on DVD or something. It's like, yeah, I have it, but it's not one of my favorites. This one I'm really glad to have in a high end collection like that. So that's my final shout out to it. But with that being said, I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for watching this review. Stay tuned for my last video, which will be coming out tomorrow. Probably I want to get it up before Easter for those of you that celebrate. Which will be ranking the 10 movies. So with that being said, thanks for watching this review and stay scared. Bye.